Hello and welcome to this interview with Alan Chimacoff, one of our artists presently on display at Alfa Art Gallery's current exhibition, Interchangeable Lens, Frame of Mind. My name is Katie Perrin, and together we will be going over some of Chimacoff's artistic process, as well as the pieces that were graciously contributed to both our physical and online presentations. We're going to start off pretty simple today. Alan, how are you?
I'm never better. How about you?
Good. We're really excited to have this opportunity to talk with you today and learn more about your art and aesthetic practice. So first, tell us a little bit about yourself. Where are you from and where do you live now? And how did you initially get into art and begin your career as an
Well,
artist?
to start from the end, I'm not sure I have a career as an artist, but I'm a Jersey boy from day one. I was born and bred and lived in northern New Jersey. Went away for several years to go to college and work in a couple of places, and then came back to New Jersey. I live in Princeton. I came to Princeton almost 50 years ago to teach. Is that right? Almost, no, maybe it's, yeah, 1973. That's almost 50 years ago. So I taught at Princeton I taught architecture, not art or anything like that, because I am an architect and I practiced as an architect for decades. Did most of the work that I did as an architect were buildings for colleges and universities around the country, mostly in the Northeast, but as far west as Arizona State and various other places. I got interested in photography when I was in fifth grade, and I had a sort of a visual passion for cameras. I loved the way they looked, and so I got one, and then I got another one, and I got a more sophisticated one, and I could never afford the ones that I really wanted. To have a photography club. And he was so smart. He would give us assignments, monthly assignments, with a theme to go out and photograph old people, people at work, that kind of thing. And we would process our own pictures, take them, process our pictures, and come back every month. And we would have these discussions. And from him, because of him, I learned at a very early age that pictures and images have meanings way beyond the picture or the image. And so that's how it started. All through high school, I did kind of standard high school photography stuff, photographing football games and that kind of thing. And then I didn't do much except photograph buildings as I built slide collections, which ultimately I used for teaching and that kind of stuff. I taught architecture first at Cornell for 4 years and then for 15 years or so at Princeton. When I left teaching to practice full-time in architecture. And then somewhere along the line, I discovered Photoshop in my laptop that the office provided. And it was like carrying a darkroom around. It was just unbelievably interesting. And so where I hadn't been able to do much serious photographing for decades, because I didn't have a darkroom, I didn't have the space, and I didn't place to store the stinky chemicals and that kind of stuff. Here it was, and I could make pictures when I was on an airplane traveling back and forth to Arizona or someplace else. And that's how I got going again. And, you know, one thing leads to another, and you get to know some people and you get involved with communications with other photographers. And there's so much stuff online that it just built into something that I did almost full time when I was still practicing. I quit practicing a few years ago. So now that's what I do pretty much all day, every day.
That's awesome. Thank you for telling us about that. Now I want to pivot a little bit to talk about your inspiration behind the selection of your photos on display in our show, Interchangeable Lens, Frame of Mind. So what's sort of your inspiration behind these?
Well, there's a description that I wrote these particular photographs. For anyone who can't see them or doesn't see them yet, they're all photographs of rust. Which is one of the most destructive yet most beautiful substances on Earth. And right in various places like my website, my real interests begin with physical things, and that makes sense because I came up making physical things as an architect and so forth. And they always are involved with materialities and materials have to worry about the weather. And the perfect example of materials that get attacked by weather is rust. And it's got these amazingly beautiful colors and so forth. And the fact that it's destruction in process is interesting to me in and of itself. So these pictures are of rust and of the attack that rust has. Actually, they're of steel, rusted steel, because I mean, iron-based things are the only things that really rust. Other things decay in other ways. And it's a tank someplace in New Jersey, a great big water storage tank that was constructed out of steel plates with bolts and rivets, and it's got ladders on it and pipes and tubes and various things. And so I spent several hours there one day, several years ago. And then I went back. A cop came and stopped me and wondered what I was doing, which often happens when you take pictures of peculiar things, especially nowadays, because people think that people who have cameras are spies or something like that. So that's how this place became an attraction. I saw it when I was driving on the road, and I went back and found it when I had camera with me, and took all these pictures.
All right. Thank you for giving us that description of your inspiration, your work. And I definitely want to talk more in depth about that a little later in our interview. Sort of next, this brings me to the question of why do you choose to work with the medium of photography, and how does the medium relate to your overall aesthetic practice and to the messaging in your work?
Well, as I said, I started when I was a little kid, and somewhere along the line in the last 20 years is the last most recent time that I've gotten re-involved again, after I discovered Photoshop. And I discovered a couple of things. I think that I always have viewed the world through an imaginary viewfinder of a camera. And that's just, I think it's because I started doing that when I was a little kid. And so when I look at something, instinctively sort of make a frame for it in my mind. And otherwise, there's no real reason why photography. Well, there are a couple of reasons. I could draw okay, but I could never control paint. I did a bunch of painting when I was in college, and I couldn't control paint, so I wasn't good at it. So I didn't do it. I did a lot of sculpture. And almost went to graduate school in fine arts in sculpture, but I didn't, because I felt I owed a debt to my father's big investment in my college education. So I said, okay, I'll go to work as an architect for a couple of years, and if I like it, I'll continue. If not, I'll go to graduate school in fine arts. And then I got hooked because I worked with a great architect for several years. That's how it came about. It's sort of an art or self-creating process, but the seeing part and understanding space in two dimensions has always been a part of my thought processes, natural visual thought processes.
Yeah, thank you for talking about that. And I think it's really interesting how your background as an architect particularly is informed your art. And I definitely want to touch on that more later as well. In your artist statement, you describe your ideology and the motivation behind your aesthetic practice, in which you say your photographic perspective is shaped by fascination with cities, abstract art, real and illusory space, a love of materials, and the effects that weather, climate, and neglect have upon them. As well as you mentioned your interest in using photography to seek out abstraction in the mundane everyday world. What is the significance behind your choice to experiment with abstraction in your artistic practice?
Oh, interesting question. And I don't know that I really have an answer. I guess I got fascinated when I was around 20 with Cubist images. And I've been trying to figure them out ever since. And there's the relationship, ambiguities of space that exist in Cubism, where two-dimensional means are used to create, in a sense, artificial three-dimensional things, has always interested me. My wife says I have a very, very high tolerance for ambiguity, and I think that's probably consistent with that. I mean, I'm really interested in just the idea that two things can occupy the same space simultaneously where they can't in reality. In 3 dimensions, they can't. But in the illusions of space that you can create in 2 dimensions, you can make that happen. And so I'm interested in representing things visually that are ambiguous. Now, one thing that is curious about this set of pictures, these steel tank pictures, is that they're not very ambiguous at all. They're pretty clear at what they represent. I had another set of photographs that I was thinking about submitting to this show. Somebody said, no, why don't you do the Rust ones? I like those better. And so I'm a pushover for other people's influences. So I said, okay, because these have never been exhibited before. And I figured since they're a little bit old, it will be interesting to have a look at them.
Yeah.
I really am interested in visual illusions, also the illusions of space making on a 2-dimensional surface. They're just endlessly fascinating to me.
Yeah.
I came to in architecture that people talk about form following function. They talk about the plan of the building being a generator of all of the entirety of the buildings. And when I was an undergraduate, I had this brilliant English teacher, a guy who wrote an article when he was 26 years old that changed architectural discourse. I mean, he was one of these guys who both knows everything and has more ideas per square inch than anybody on earth. And so I went with a bunch of these, naively, I went to talk to him with a bunch of these quotations about the plan being the generator and how everything emerges from the plan and so forth. And he looked at me like this. He said, "Well, yes, dear boy, but that says nothing at all about illusory depth in the vertical surface." And I thought to myself, geez, that says nothing about illusory depth in the vertical surface. What does that mean? And so it changed my life. I mean, it was one of those things that I had to go find out about. And once I understood that, well, that's one of the reasons in ways that I got interested in the illusions of 2-dimensional stuff.
I think that's really fascinating. And you've touched on this a little bit already, but something that really stood out to me in your resume is your impressive background in architecture. And how do you think that being an architect has informed your photography?
Well, as I said, I think that I've always viewed the world through an imaginary viewfinder. So if anything, it might be the other way around. Clearly, the subject matter of much of what I do, I mean, it almost all is descendant from physical things that people have made, the amazing things that people have made. But the things that are there, and they're real. And I think one of the things that interests me about to link that question to your previous one is that if you can make something that people are aware of, that heightens their awareness by virtue of the abstraction that you bring to it, then I think that to me, that's where sort of cross-purpose influences are between my upbringing and life as an architect and trying to explain things through visual imagery. And the collection of photographs is interesting in that respect too, because they're photographs taken at different distances from the surfaces of the rusted steel. So in some cases, the flakes of paint and surface material of the steel are the subject matter because they're taken from very close, and in others they just become part of the texture of the image, where the composition of the photograph is in a more conventional, traditional means of creating compositions.
Yeah, definitely. That's something I noticed, and I think is really like key to the viewing experience. And in your works on display in this exhibition, what are some central themes or subject matters that you explore?
Well, there are compositional themes that are evident, that really enjoy attacking convention. even in making things that are fairly conventional. And so there are many compositional theories that people talk about, the rule of thirds, where you balance things one way or another, but never ever deal with something like a tomahawk in the forehead. And so these pictures do both, not each one, not any one of them individually, but as a group. Some are compositional and some are sort of anti-compositional. They're all there's simply called tank and a number. And the number is the number that comes off of the metadata on the photograph. It's easier to do it that way than it is to say tank 1, tank 2, tank 3, because someday I might want to add tank number 485 to the list, and then I would have to call 485 7 when it shouldn't be. It should be 4. Anyway, the 786 is one that has a simple T shape of rivets, slightly curved at the top because it's a cylindrical tank, and then a row of rivets that runs right down the middle. The light changes from one side to the other of the rivets because that's where the sun was at the time. And so it's a combination of very static, symmetrical, centralized view and the dynamic of the movement of light built into the same thing. While at the same time, there's very little of a compositional strategy involved with that. It's sort of anti-compositional. Whereas some of the others, the ones that have one of the horizontal ones that has got a pipe running near it, a pipe and a shadow of the pipe, it's number 450, and that's focuses on the center, while the rivets make a very sort of casual composition across the broad field, where almost dead center is a horizontal line, but the horizontal line has to be curved because, once again, it's a cylindrical tank. So it's a kind of composition and anti-composition at the same time. They're interesting that way.
And I'm really intrigued by this tank series, in which you capture the mesmerizing and multicolored effects of iron oxide transforming the surface of an abandoned steel plate water storage tank. And I particularly love how the closely cropped nature of these photographs seem to invite viewers to contemplate the colors and textures of the rusted metal close up, prompting them to marvel at the mystery and power of nature. And I think you already mentioned some of this a bit already, but what is your inspiration behind naming these pieces, and what stories do you think they tell?
Well, the naming, as I said, is really just out of convenience, and sometimes apply very pragmatic names, and other times metaphoric ones. These are very pragmatic. I mean, the tank is the tank, and the numbers are come off of the images. That's the brilliance and the wonders of digital photography. Is you can always, if you can find the image, you can find everything there is to know about it. It's just it's a real joy. But I think you hit it right when you said that in some instances that it's the close-up nature of things. If in 460, that's the closest one, I think. Well, 460, and I guess it's 825, but 460 has other things. You could really see the attack that the rust has on the different pieces of the steel. You can see the flakiness of the surfaces, of the smoother surfaces, and how. Do I know how many times this tank was painted before people neglected it and the rust took over? No idea, but you can get a sense that it was painted many times over because some of the pieces have a thickness to them, and you can see them in the flakes, and you can see them in residue of steel after the flakes go away. And so it's heightened awareness, I mean, I guess is a version of how you described it. And I think that's really the intention, is to get people to look more closely. And if they look more closely at certain things, at some things, they might look more closely at all things. And if they happen to be driving down a street in Pennington, New Jersey, and see this tank about 150 feet off the street, they might say, "Damn, that's interesting. I remember seeing those rust pictures once." And if they happen to see the same tank, well, they'll see the same rust. They probably won't, because by now the rust has probably changed because time has evolved and gone.
And of all your works, which is your favorite? And if you don't have one, which piece would you like to talk a little bit more about for a moment?
These, I don't really have a favorite, or that changes. There are many more of these. I mean, I had to make a selection of 6, and of all of these 6, they are all very flat and frontal, and there's a 7th that didn't make it in, which I wish I had included. That's really my favorite because it's quirky. But of these, I guess I'm more interested in the ones that are compositional because they have some spatial depth to them. The flatter ones, there were 2 that are just surface only, and I felt that that was important because it's really like really is like a painting. And an abstract painting. The 773 and 825 really fall into that category. The other ones where there are the artifacts of the construction of the tank itself, I think to me are a little more interesting because they give you more stuff to look at. Where 773 is the one that's got a lot of green and sort of aqua colored paint that's remains, that's been in the process of being eaten away. So it's like, I guess I'm of all of these, I'm interested most in 2 of them, 450 and 460, because 450 is the furthest away and 460 is the closest. And in 450, you really get a sense of the compositional aspects of the lines on the page, the pipe running vertically almost in the center, and its shadow almost in the center, but the space in between is actually the dead center of the picture. And then behind that, or on the surface running behind that, is this secondary composition of the repetitive dots of all of the rivets, that the bolts, whatever they are, that put this thing together. And then by contrast, 460 is something that takes you right in close. There's a piece of the ladder that's bolted to the tank itself, and device that holds the ladder makes part of the composition. And again, the center of this thing is probably the shadow, not part of the objects, and so those are interesting to me.
All right, thank you.